Okay, good morning, everybody. Welcome to ACE's September monthly program. Today we are going to be joined by Rick Pollak, who will be the presentation medic and talking about making better presentations. But to start off, I wanted to give everybody a little bit of an overview of ACE for those of you who don't know about ACE, although I think most of the people on here do. ACE is a nonprofit association of professionals, and our members provide an array of services to businesses, nonprofits, and other organizations. The focus of ACE is really three areas. One is networking, connecting and developing relationships with other consultants to build your referral network. Learning, build your professional skills with online and in-person programming. And promotion. We'll hear quite a bit about promotion today through Rick's program, as well as an exciting new opportunity that ACE members have. And I will ask Carrie Yardley to tell us a little bit more about that. Carrie, can you let us know?
Sure. If you share screen, I actually have a couple of slides presented. And here we go. All right, so let me actually look professional about this and go into the right mode here. Presentation mode, is that what it is?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now I have to find that. Well, maybe I'll just give up on that. But anyway, the new program that we launched today is called ACE Speaks, which is an opportunity for our members and a benefit for our community to do 1 hour presentations at their various business programs. Thank you so much to the ACE members who've helped us put it together. First, my outreach committee, which has been awesome. If you're on it, would you raise your hand? Yep. Clap, clap, yep. And to the brave ACE members who stepped forward to become presenters. As of yesterday, we have an actual panel that we've posted on our website. And oops, not a good morning. It's control click, right? Follow the link. Open link. All right. This is how it looks. It's the program. It's on the resources tab.
So Carrie, you're only sharing the window for your slide deck, so we don't see your web browser.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Let me see if I can get there.
Isn't technology fun?
I'm having a hard time today, I have to admit. Here are our speakers. They are brave. They go across a number of disciplines. Nargis has the honor of being first because her name begins with A. But as you can see, if you know ACE, this is a really broad range of expertise. And we're very, very pleased to have it started. That having been said, it doesn't mean you can't join. We've deliberately created our menu online, on paper, digitally, so we can just add speakers as needed and hope that you will get in touch with us so that we can offer even more programming. Now, Katie Palmer is here. Katie, could you say something so that your face appears?
Hi.
Yeah. Okay. She is head of programming for the Lewiston Auburn Chamber, and she has worked with us to develop, basically batting around ideas about the programming and what people would be interested in. But we've worked hand in hand with her to develop a promotional program so that if you speak, you will be speaking to a wide audience, or at least a wide audience will know you're speaking. So I think that's a great benefit. We're going to be doing that also with our ACE outlets. So there's lots of reasons to get your name out there. And because of the way we structured this with regional business organizations, to get your name out throughout the state. Okay. So I'm going to get my PowerPoint back. That went much more smoothly. And we are almost done putting together a series of workshops to follow on Rick's program that will be in small groups. We'll have dates likely at the beginning of October, the middle to end of October, and in November for standalone workshops. You don't have to attend all three, with a very distinguished faculty who are going to facilitate. Kendra Rand not only has her own communication office, but she teaches communication at the University of Maine, Orono, and College of the Atlantic. Rick, I'm going to pass over your introduction because I know that Terry's going to do it, but he's the presentation medic. And Linda Verrill, if you're in the Maine community, Linda is probably the premier PR consultant. And she knocks together programs for clients all of the time and keeps them on message all of the time. So I'm very, very pleased that she agreed to sign up. You'll hear more about the program if you're a member in the coming week. We're going to be opening it to members first. There'll be, if we've got 3 speakers, there'll be a total of 12 slots, but if the demand is high, we're going to do what we can to add more faculty and more opportunities to participate. So if you want to hone a program, this is the place to go. You'll be with your peers, you'll get criticism, and you'll get expert feedback on how to hone your performance and presentation. So there you have it.
All right, thank you, Terry.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can stop presenting now.
There we go.
We're going back and forth on all the presentation options today. Before we get started with today's program, I'd like to let everybody know about a couple of the upcoming programs we have. So in October, we're going to be revisiting crafting comprehensive consulting agreements. We offered this last October as well in partnership with MTI, and Carrie will take us through crafting those agreements and in particularly well-designed statements of work. That'll be Friday, October 20th at 9 o'clock. It will be a hybrid event. We will be in person at the MTI offices in Brunswick, as well as via Zoom. And then in November, Malika Malhotra will be with us, and she's going to talk about growing your business faster with a niche brand. That'll be on Friday, November 17th, and we'll get more details about whether that will be hybrid, live, or Zoom in the coming month or so. So at this point, I'd like to introduce Rick Pollak. Today's topic is how to give engaging presentations, even if the topic is boring. Rick is the founder of the Presentation Medic, a consulting company specializing in curing boring presentations. He coaches speakers for investor pitches, product presentations, and TEDx talks. Rick is a member of ACE and the president of ACE's sister organization, the Society of Professional Consultants in the Boston area. So at this point, I would like to welcome Rick Pollak.
Hey, Terry, thank you. Hello, everyone, and a happy Friday. What we're going to be going over in the next 45 minutes to an hour is you're going to learn some techniques to give an engaging presentation, even if your topic is not really exciting. So I think a lot, and Katie, I know you volunteered for Lewiston Auburn Chamber of Commerce to have some ACE speakers. And I think from a lot of you who have gone to chamber meetings or gone to BNI meetings, it's something that people will get up for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 1 hour, and they will just go through a data dump. They'll just give information, talk about something, and after they sit down, if the people in the audience are still awake, they're going to say, well, that's nice, but I knew that, or I could have Googled it. So really, I think a takeaway here is you're going to learn some techniques here to make your presentation more than an information data dump. So at the end, the people are going to understand, they're going to care, and they're going to remember what you said. And if it's something that, if you're looking, most likely, if you're going to be giving a presentation to a chamber or a BNI meeting or whatever else, the people in that room might not hire you, but you want them to remember what you do so they can refer you. So that's one of the keys about talking about your business, is to do that and also show uniqueness in your business. And I'll be going through a lot of that in the next hour or so, of saying that, and I know a lot of people here, but whether you're a videographer, whether you're a scrum master, whether you're a sales coach or a leadership coach, there are hundreds of other people who do the same thing. So if you're going to be giving a talk, you don't want to just give the standard thing about what that is and not have the chance to differentiate yourself of what's unique about you. So Terry, I'm going to share my screen. I'll go into my PowerPoint here. All right, and if I go into slideshow mode here, okay, I think everyone has that. So the topic is how to give an engaging presentation, even if your topic is boring. And Carrie talked about ACE Speaks and mentioned we'll have the workshops in October and November about that, but it's really a chance for you to talk about your business. And whether it's at a local chamber or just at a local group, you have a chance to differentiate your business. So one thing, if you're just giving a data dump, just talking about what you do, and let's say you're an accountant and you're saying, well, this is what I do and I help you with your taxes and that. And like people are sitting there, well, yeah, I know what you do. And you may as well just have a little sign that comes up that says boring next 20 minutes. If you're just giving standard information that people already know. So a lot of you have probably heard TED Talks, watched TED Talks. What you might not know is what TED stands for. It stands for technology, entertainment, and design. The original TED program was focused on those three things: technology, entertainment, and design. And now the talks are just about on any topic at all. But for TED, one thing about that, and I've coached TED Talks before as part of my presentation coaching business, but one thing I'll work with on the speakers is to focus on that one idea worth spreading, that big idea. And I think a lot of you who've seen people talk about their businesses at chamber meetings is people will just give 10 different things of what they do, and they haven't focused on an idea worth spreading, a big idea. So that's really what I want to do first, is talk about lessons from TED Talks. A good TED Talk or a good talk about your business to a Chamber of Commerce needs a couple of things. It needs a big idea and it needs a call to action. So if you've watched TED Talks, you've probably seen there's one big idea that you have. One famous TED Talk, Simon Sinek, is called Start With Why. And he repeats Start With Why, I think around 6 or 7 times through that talk. But that is his big idea and his call to action also of doing that. So think about when you're talking about your business, a lesson from TED is to come up with that big idea that people understand and come up with a call to action. And one thing about TED Talks, and here's a picture of Bill Gates giving a TED Talk, the goal isn't to give a talk where you're getting millions of views on YouTube. Really, a much more achievable, realistic goal is when you're at a chamber meeting, is not think of TED, T-E-D, think of someone named Ted sitting there. You want Ted in your audience to have a reason to care about that big idea and the call to action. Have Ted remember what you're saying, and Ted might not hire you, but if Ted understands what you do, he might be able to refer you to an ideal client. So lessons from TED Talks, I'm going to go through 3 lessons from TED Talks that you can work into your presentations. 3 lessons from TED that you can use in those ACE Speaks presentations. And it's understand, care, and remember. So the first one, I mentioned the big idea. But that big idea that you might have, and whether it's in leadership coaching, whether it's in Scrum or anything else, if you're giving a talk about your business, come up with that big idea, but make it simple, make it easy to understand. And Carrie, you and I spoke a couple months ago talking about someone who does something very technical. And Carrie, I think these were your words, but dumbing down without talking down. One thing you need to do is come up with that big idea, make it simple, make it easy to understand, but don't oversimplify it. And one great way to do this, I'll talk about it a few slides from now, of using simile, analogy, metaphor, focusing in so you can take that big idea, and even though it might sound complicated to some people, using an analogy, using a metaphor to simplify it and making it easy to understand. Audience needs a reason to care about that big idea. A lot of times, instead of just talking about, I do this, this is my leadership coaching, this is my videography, these are all the different things we do. If you're talking about a problem and then a solution, it's not boring anymore. It becomes engaging, because a lot of people can say, oh, either I have that problem or I know someone who has that problem. And you're talking about something that your uniqueness, you can fix that. So that's the reason to care, problem and a solution. So that's always a good thing to put into the talk. And I've got another slide, a few slides up here, that's talking about results and uniqueness. So a problem and solution, but the big thing, a reason to care. If you start going through on your talk and the people don't have a reason to care, they don't have a story, they don't have a something there, then you say, well, this doesn't apply to me. I don't care about it, and they're going to be bored. So that's a way to draw them in, is a problem and a solution. And the last lesson from TED here is the call to action. So from that, just moving this on my, a lesson from TED Talks, 3rd lesson, develop a call to action that's easy to remember. And a lot of times, back, it's not called Twitter anymore, it's called X, but one of the tests they'll go through, whether it's on coaching a TED Talk or coaching someone to give a presentation about their business, is can you take that call to action or that big idea and put it into 140 characters, the length of the original tweet. And that's something that you want someone to remember something, and maybe 5 or 10 words, something simple that's easy to remember. So easy to understand, something they care about, and easy to remember. Those are important goals that apply to TED Talks and apply to talks to chambers of commerce about your business. So, and if you have any questions, any comments, please interrupt me. No need to wait until the end. So that's that. And one thing about giving engaging presentations, there's no magic pill. There's no pill that you can take to do that. But there is a secret that TED Talk users give, the people giving TED Talks use, and something that you can use now. It's actionable now. You don't have to go through years and years of training on it. And really, a big takeaway that I hope you get from today is don't overload people with information they don't care about. I mean, you'll see this at chamber meetings, you'll see this at BNI meetings, as people go through and they just give that whole laundry list, that whole data dump of all the things that they do in their business. But you have to give someone a reason to care. I mean, this has been true for a while, but in the last year, I'm sure you're all familiar with ChatGPT. It will give you more information even than a Google search. But if I wanted to know, some of the latest trends in leadership or in business model canvases or different things that we speak about, you want to make sure that you are giving information that people can't get from ChatGPT. And a way to do that is really to focus on your audience. And 3 tips I call for killer presentations. Tip number 1, aim for that target audience. Who are you speaking to? Okay. If you're talking about Agile and Scrum and talking to a bunch of Scrum Masters, you're talking, that's one target audience. If you're talking about the same topic to a Chamber of Commerce and people don't even know what that is, then it's a whole totally different presentation. So looking at that and saying, who is that target audience? Make sure that you are using analogies, metaphors, simplifying things for an audience who's not an expert in the field. And if you are talking to people who are experts in the field, then you can start using all those acronyms, you can use the technical terms. But that's really the first rule of a tip for a good presentation. It's making sure you're targeting that audience. You have to know who is in the audience and what they care about. And giving a local Chamber of Commerce a reason to care, that's probably going to be different than people who are experts in the field. So that's tip 1, aiming for that target. And keeping along with the metaphor here, find and create the audience triggers. What are you going to say about your business, about your service, that's going to trigger people to say, oh, I have that problem, or I know someone who has that problem, or, oh, this is interesting to me. This is compelling now because the speaker has triggered something that is grabbing my attention. It's captured my attention. It's going to keep my attention. But that trigger is going to be different, for every audience. And Francis, if you're talking about leadership training, it's different for different audiences of who cares about what is going to trigger them. So that's the second part, the target, the trigger. And if you can see on the metaphor, well, what would be there? You've got a target, you've got the gun, the trigger. But probably most important, get rid of the bullets. That barrage of boring bullet points puts people to sleep. You want to avoid bullet points. You can use a few, but one thing about Microsoft PowerPoint, you open up PowerPoint and it gives you the blank slide and it gives you bullet point 1, bullet point 2, bullet point 3. And it's something that you have to really move away from that and say, no, I don't want to use bullet points. So obviously, well, what am I going to do? How am I going to present? Well, that's my next slide. Stories. Telling stories, they help you connect with that audience. They're going to capture the attention. They're going to keep the attention. They help that audience understand, care, and remember. Stories are a much more effective way of getting an audience engaged, even if it's not a great, not a really exciting topic. With the Society of Professional Consultants, the SPC, we had an accountant come in a couple years ago. Before the pandemic, he was in person. And he was talking about the new tax code. And that could be incredibly boring about all the different things. But he made it a very compelling presentation because he was telling stories. He was telling, I had this client who had a problem. Here's how we were able to solve it. Here's how we use this new tax code that wasn't there a year ago to save her money. So just taking information that's not really exciting, but telling a story about it with a problem and a solution, that can keep an audience engaged instead of just doing data dump or bullet point after bullet point after bullet point. And one thing about that is, we are wired for story. We don't see ourselves in bullet points. We see ourselves in stories. And one thing about telling stories, people, especially technical people, are saying, oh, well, no, that's not, I'm talking about a serious topic here. This is my consulting business. This is a serious topic. I don't think stories are appropriate, but they're really not. There's nothing abnormal. And if you can get the movie reference here from Young Frankenstein, I would say there's nothing abnormal about telling a story, because it's how your brain works. And for example, here, a structure, how to help people remember a story, is again, talk about a problem, talk about a solution, but don't leave it as problem and solution. I know Bob's here. Bob's a sales coach, and he knows that if people are talking about features and benefits and features and benefits and features and benefits, that's not going to help. It's something that's part of it, but not the whole part at all. What you want to focus on in that story is results. It's not problem solution only. It's the results that the people in the story get, the people in the audience are going to get, or people they know are going to get. And also, when you talk about the results, make sure that it differentiates from the status quo. It's an important part of presentations, an important part of sales, because people are used to the status quo. They are not going to change unless they see that the results from whatever your service is are going to be substantially better than the status quo. I see there's one thing in chat here. It says, could you comment on, this is from Carrie, could you comment on whether there's a difference between presenting live to a small group or to a large group and online? Important tweaks in style. And yes, Carrie, I will talk about that, because that's an important thing as well. I'll save that for a little bit later, because yeah, it's again based on the audience on that. So, and one more thing in the chat. Okay, thumbs up from Carrie. Good. Okay, so from that, one more on this here on this slide: problem, solution, results, and uniqueness. Something that a lot of presenters at chamber meetings don't talk about. If you are getting up and talking about your leadership training class, and then next week someone else talks about leadership training, and the third week someone else talks about this type, or business consulting or whatever, you want to show how you stand out, something unique about you and your business. So that's business storytelling rule number one. You're showing your uniqueness and something unique about you and your business. I mentioned before ChatGPT. There are probably hundreds of other people who have, when you say, what's your specialty? I'm a leadership consultant. I'm a business consultant. And like, well, there's lots of people who do that. So when you're putting that talk together, it's like, what's unique about you? How do you solve problems? How do you come up with solutions? Different. It might be the same solution that another a competitor of yours would come up with. But again, you want to show something unique, some kind of personality. And even it's just that, hey, I'm a lot of fun to work with. I'm easy to work with. It could be more of that, or I come, these ideas are proprietary to me. Whatever you think about your business is going to make you stand out. Don't leave that out of the presentation. That should be a main part of your business story. And the best way to do that is not bragging about yourself. Hey, I'm the only one who can do that. Working that into a story. So it doesn't sound like a brag, but it sounds like here's how I helped a client. Okay. Business storytelling rule number 2, make sure your audience can see themselves in your story. So if I was talking and said, well, I'm a financial consultant, and last week I was up in Seal Harbor at Martha Stewart's estate by the water, and we were talking about how to manage this $1 billion hedge fund. People don't see themselves in that. You are talking, whether it's the Lewiston Auburn Chamber of Commerce or a group in Portland or whatever, you want people to say, hey, she's like me, he's like me. And any story you're telling, you want people in the audience to see themselves in that story. Not talking about meeting with Martha Stewart or Warren Buffett, or you want to make it sound like, okay, yeah, I can relate to that. Rule number 3, story should help the audience see a transformation to a better situation. A lot of times people will tell a story and it might be a really great story, but if it's not showing a change, a transformation to something better, then it's a nice story. It might keep the audience entertained, but you want to make sure that if you're showing some kind of coaching that you've done, if it's sales coaching and they doubled their sales, if it's leadership training, if it's HR type of training where they reduce their churn, their turnover from 40 down to 10%, that's something that you want to see a transformation to a better situation. And rule number 4, probably something that you do not want to forget. You are not the hero of your story. Stories usually have heroes and villains, but you are not the hero. The audience or the big idea is the hero. So don't tell the story saying, I did this great thing. They hired me and this is what happened. It's more of, this client had a problem and we were able to help that client get a solution. But in the story, you are an advisor, a trusted advisor, not the hero. A lot of people forget about that, and it just comes across like they're bragging. Okay, let me stop for a minute here. And Carrie's question, I think, was live versus in person versus large versus small. And I'm just going to have something to drink here for a second here. And one thing about virtual, and this really since the pandemic, because people would say, oh, no, you can't give a presentation over Zoom. But one advantage of virtual is I'm looking at my webcam. I am making eye contact with everyone at the same time. You can't do that in a room, small room, large room. If you are talking in Lewiston, Auburn to a group of people, and there might be 50 or 100 people in the room, you need to look at one person for like around 5 or 10 seconds, then look at someone else, then look at someone else. Eye contact is important, whether it's virtual or in person. One thing that I've seen a lot of speakers do in person is they'll just look up and they'll just be looking out to the back of the room and they're not making eye contact with anyone. Virtual, it's easy. You make eye contact with everyone. In a room, large or small, you want to make sure you have eye contact. With virtual, it's hard to see the reactions, especially now I'm sharing the screen. I see my slides and I see like three little rectangles with people's faces there, and that's all I see. So I can't really tell unless someone raises their hand. I can't see if they look puzzled. I can't see if I need to go faster, if I need to go slower. In a room, in a live audience, it's much more easy to get feedback, to see how you're doing, if people understand, if they look they're nodding their heads, if they're smiling, or they're looking down at their phones, or they're looking disinteresting, or they're looking puzzled. So I think live is much preferable that way, because you really can get a reaction to see how you're doing on that. So, Carrie, did that answer your question, or do you have a follow-up on that?
Just quickly, is there a way of getting that interaction on a video presentation? I mean, are there techniques for monitoring your audience, for eliciting response?
Yeah, and actually, if you can see on the slide here, I do have interactive. So let me wait on that slide on that, but I'll mention it now since you asked the question. Is I've seen on a lot of virtual presentations doing what people call gamification, and they're asking the audience, oh, type this in the chat, or do this little puzzle here, or let's have this poll. Personally, I'm not a fan of that, because I think kind of it seems contrived in a lot of cases. So I usually don't use it. But one thing that I'll try to do on interactive is make sure, if I can see who's in the audience, who I know, and I know Carrie, I mentioned a conversation we have. Francis, I mentioned you there. I think I mentioned, because I know Matthew does Scrum. I know Alice does video. So it's more of mentioning that as examples, and that's a way to keep it interactive. So it's not something that's contrived. It's something that, if you know who's in the audience and you're connecting with them, if you are mentioning them in your examples, that is a fairly easy way to keep it interactive without looking contrived. But it's a lot more difficult on that, where you can't see people's faces and that. But another thing that you can do is stop sharing your screen for a minute, looking at people, and say, okay, and I can say, oh, Matthew, you don't look puzzled right now. You look engaged here. You're smiling, and Alice, I can see Alice smiling. And that. So one thing, I'm talking to you. I'm not talking to my slides. So every once in a while, I like to look at that and say, okay, here are the people here, and the presentation. Something that you can do on Zoom is go out of screen sharing for a minute and just look at the people. And if you're asking for questions, so. And speaking of that, let me just ask for questions or comments now before I go on. Anything?
Rick, I've got a question regarding the triggers.
Yes.
Do we need to use them in the beginning of the presentation or all the way through the presentation?
The triggers, it's really on that, on what you're talking about, but you want to get it at the beginning to get people to pay attention, that people who care, because in that first minute or two, when you're giving the presentation, people say, oh, who is she? What is she going to talk about? What does she know? Why should I care about what she's going to say? So you want to get that trigger in, towards the beginning. And the trigger is more of something people care about. And it could be something that they're not caring about. One example that I've used before is someone walking down the street and they see a sign for a computer shop. And it says, we can help fix your hard drive. You walk by it every day and you ignore it. Well, my hard drive's fine. But then one day your hard drive's making noise. It's like, oh, wait a minute, something's wrong with my hard drive. Wait a minute, there was that sign. So that sign then becomes a trigger, where it might not have been a trigger last week. So I think it's more of having that, and maybe just throughout weaving that in and out of the presentation. So Angela, I just see you put something in the chat. So you have a tip to share. So, and you said when the time is right. So I think the time's right, Angela. Why don't you go ahead?
Okay, thank you. I was the VP of HR for a social services organization in the last few years. And one of the things I learned from the social workers in that group is what I call the 12-second rule. all too often when, as a presenter, we ask a question, we may feel like we've got to fill the space up pretty quickly. But if we literally, and I use my fingers, down, and I count to 12. If you count to 12 seconds, it allows the brain time to sort of decide, do I have something to share? Do I feel brave enough to share it? And okay, here I go, right? So it gives the participants that space and time to be able to answer your question or share. So I just wanted to share that because I learned it from some brilliant social workers.
Well, that's a great tip. Yeah, I think don't be afraid of pauses. Don't be afraid of dead air or empty spaces. If it goes on 15, 20 seconds, then it's like, whoa, what happened? Especially online, because online people say, oh, Zoom froze again. What's wrong? But yeah, I think, Angela, that's a great technique. Anyone else with questions or comments?
Regarding this interactive parts, sorry, Mike.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. How about bringing some discussion to the whole group instead of sending them, to the breakout rooms and then they come and present the results, what they just discussed, but just bringing some a question or a topic for the discussion and everybody participates.
Yeah, and I think one thing that's a lot easier to do on Zoom is breakout rooms.
Right.
I know with the Society of Professional Consultants, when we have our networking, we'll have a general session first where people introduce themselves, and we'll come up with a prompt. We'll go into breakout rooms for 10 minutes, then come back, then do another breakout, and then at the end, it's a general session again. In person, it's hard to do that. In person, really, you're talking to the whole group all the time. Unless you're doing a workshop where you get 5 people on a table here and 5 people on a table here and 5 people on a table here. But yeah, it's you don't want to have people in breakouts all the time. And after you do some kind of breakout, if you're doing something virtually online, then you want to have some discussion with the general group. So, Mike, did you have something?
Yes, Rick. And if you're going to get to this in a little bit, then that's great. So I don't want to throw your pace off, but would you talk a little bit about sequencing and ordering the presentation? And what I'm getting at specifically is I found it helpful to open with an anecdote or a story to kind of catch people's attention.
Mm-hmm.
And so would you talk about where maybe things may be best placed in a discussion or a presentation? And when you talk about these stories or illustrations or anecdotes, where they may be best sequenced.
Yeah, and I can talk about that now. I have some slides a little bit later on, but I think really having a story at the beginning to grab someone's attention, to have that trigger. So if you've got that target audience, you know who's there, and you have something in that first minute or two with the trigger that's going to get them to care. That is a very strong way to open a presentation. And also a you focus. If you're talking about me, and so, well, let me tell you how I started my business. In 1984, I graduated from college and I started doing this. Then 5 years later, I started doing that. So you're not reading your resume. You are talking about the audience. The presentation is about the audience. So you want to grab their attention, and in that first minute, tell a story that say, hey, he understands me, she understands me, and they're talking about something I care about or something I need to do something about. So I think they're telling stories throughout, I think, is just keeping people engaged, having a story, but more of problem solutions so they can relate on the story. But definitely at the beginning to grab someone's attention. So, okay. And Karen, I see you've got a question. How do you handle the one person who always contributes, but not out of curiosity, but it seems to be an expert as well? The obnoxious type. You don't want to shut down all interaction, but they suck the energy out of the room. Yes, I have seen that many, many times. And yeah, it's difficult, and depending on who the person is, if you've never met them before, or it's someone you know, and sometimes they are just talkative people who like to show off, who like to tell how much they do, how much they know. And sometimes it's someone who's hostile, who is trying to say in the audience, you the speaker, you don't know anything. I know a hell of a lot more than you do. And it's something that in person, it's easy that if that person becomes obnoxious, usually everyone in the room is pissed off as well. And I think it's more of kind of letting the audience control that, because they're going to be giving dirty looks to the person who's talking too much or being obnoxious. Online, it's a little harder. In fact, it's a lot harder. If you're the host of the meeting, of course, you can just mute someone or talk over someone. But it's kind of a way to politely do that. One thing that I've learned on Zoom, and some of you might know about this, colleague of mine, Robbie Samuels, has a program out called No More Bad Zoom. And he also has a book out he has a few books out on Zoom. But yeah, if you look up No More Bad Zoom, I think it's nomorebadzoom.com, and it's Robbie Samuels. And Robbie's technique on that is if someone talks too much, you as the host or the presenter just start saying, thank you, thank you. Let's move on. And it's kind of a polite way of doing that, other than saying, would you shut up already? But it's essentially the same thing. But yeah, it's always saying in any kind of audience. But online, I think if you just say, thank you about that, and just keep on going on. But yeah, it is difficult. As you always seem to get people like that, whether it's the know-it-alls or that. So, but let me just share my screen again here, because I want to make sure I cover enough information here. All right, share, and we're back. And I do have a worksheet, which I'm going to show at the end of my slides here. And it talks about the understand, care, and remember, and then the 3 ins and the 3 cons. And I'll go through what each of those are. But the 3 ins are interesting, insightful, interactive. And we've talked a bit about this before. We talked a bit about interactive. But you notice there's another in that's not on this list. And that is, if I click one more time here, informative. As I mentioned before, if you're giving a talk, and so many people do this at chambers or BNI meetings, whatever else, if you're giving a talk, your job is not just to give an information dump. People can look that up, or the speaker a month or two ago went through something. The only difference in the information is the person giving it. So your job's not to give an information dump, but to be interesting, insightful, and interactive. So interesting. This gets back to the targets and the triggers, but making your information interesting to this audience. And I have my my standard stock image of the diverse crowd. There, most things, if you go to any kind of stock image site, it's everyone in the crowd looks different. But again, the target, who's that target audience? What are the triggers? What is going to keep them interested? So if I'm talking about HR to a group of HR people, I'm going to be looking at different triggers than talking about HR to the C-suite, to managers who are going to be making decisions on funding. The insightful, something that a lot of us forget to do. We want to show our insight. We're not just giving the information dump. We are talking about our unique insight, something that we can do that's different than our competition, different than other people who do the same thing. Because people are paying consultants not to spit back things that people can look up. They're paying us for our insight. What is our experience, whether it's 4 years or 40 years? in that you have developed in your business some insight, and that's something that needs to come across in your talk, that you have some kind of opinion, you have some kind of insight, whether you're writing a blog post, whether you're writing an article for Main Biz, whether you're doing a video on YouTube. You want to have some kind of opinion, some kind of insight that's your expert advice. Make sure that's in your presentation. Don't just be the plain vanilla thing of here's what I do, here are the latest HR trends, here are the latest leadership trends, here's the latest in videography of how we're using 4K. And it's like, well, but what's your expert advice? What works, what doesn't work? So that's something that you want to make sure is part of your presentation, not just the information, but that insight. And then interactive, I mentioned this before on one of the questions, but include your audience members in the stories and examples. And I tried to know, so well, who's going to be the audience today? Okay, how can I work them in to that? I'm not doing polls. I'm trying to say, who's in the audience, and Mike, if he's giving a leadership training class, or Terry or whatever else, I'm trying to use examples, trying to use in stories of people there. So that's a way to be interactive. And of course, in person, it's a lot easier, just asking questions. And when I stopped sharing the screen, it became a lot more interactive as well. So those are the 3 ins. There's also the 3 cons: connection, context, and contrast. 3 things that are really going to change that presentation from boring to engaging. So what are the 3 cons? Connection. How did I know that people in the audience, what they did? And on LinkedIn, I saw that Matthew and Alice had commented and liked the post about announcing this. I said, okay, well, let me find out what they do. So it's just more of a connection, and it's okay. I use both of them in examples. I haven't met them, but I saw on LinkedIn. So it was really examining the audience before the presentation. So how can I connect with them? Well, let me find out what they do, and then use examples. Same thing with ACE member directory. If you have a local chamber, if you have a directory there, if you want to do that. So it's examining the audience. And an in-person meeting, get there early, mingle, ask people ahead of time before you're talking. Tell me about what you do. Do you have any issues with HR? Do you have any issues with with videos? Or so it's easy enough to do. One thing about doing it in the audience at the last minute, it might be fresh in your mind, or you might forget about it if you haven't written it down. But researching things ahead of time, and then at the last minute talking to people. The important thing is making a connection, knowing who's in the audience, and then saying, okay, how can I use this in the stories? And what do I think their triggers are going to be? What's going to keep them engaged? All right. And an important thing about making a connection is, I like to tell people, if you're giving a talk, whether it's one-on-one, whether it's online, whether it's in person, pretend that you're on a first date with an audience. So if I look at this picture, taking a guess from the picture, but I could definitely see this guy is talking for 30 minutes straight about himself and not asking his date a single thing about her. And then he's probably saying, enough about me. What about you? What do you think about my tie? And it's like, well, no, you don't want to have too much about you. So I like to have people do a test on their presentation, and it's the you and me problem. And a lot of times, someone asks, well, come tell us in 10 minutes. And I've helped people with BNI presentations before, but it's okay, you've got 10 minutes, talk about your business. And it's like, okay, I do this, I started here, this is what I did. but they're talking about themselves. They're not talking about the audience. And a way to do that, if you're in PowerPoint and you go into the slide sorter mode, there's a little button at the bottom that shows little boxes, and you, instead of seeing individual slides, you see all your slides in slide sorter mode. Take a look at a presentation you've given and look at each slide and say, is this a me slide or is it a you slide? Is it about me and what I do, or is it about you, the results that you want, the results that you'd like to get? And most people, when they start out with a presentation, especially if they're talking about their business, their PowerPoint deck looks like this: me, me, me. And one thing you can do is, I say, give your presentation an I exam. Not EYE, but the word I, or the letter I. One thing you can do is, if you look at your script, your slides, your chart, and if it says I, my, our spec, our brand, our widget, our feature, our benefit, turn those me slides into you slides. You can have that, pretty much that same slide, but just change the perspective of it. Instead of your point of view, it's the audience's point of view. You, we, you, your, solve, results. If you're telling a story, if the audience sees themselves in that story, then you're not talking about yourself anymore. You're not the hero. You're that guide. You're that trusted advisor. So it doesn't mean you have to scrap your presentation. It's just changing that focus, changing that point of view. Okay, so that's connection. Let me talk about the other two cons. Context. A lot of us talk about technical things. And probably the best example of this was back, I think it was 2008, when the first iPod came out. And Steve Jobs announced this at one of his big announcements, but he didn't say, this is 2 inches by 3 inches, and it has a 5 gig hard drive and this type of processor. He said, when he announced this, he said 1,000 songs in your pocket. That's what mattered. Analogies, metaphors, it's context. It's something that people can understand. It's not dumbing it down. It's just using an analogy, a metaphor that people can remember, can understand, and care about. So that's an example of context. Another example of context, there are emergency sirens, whether it's for tornadoes, whether it's for fire. A lot of times it might get tested at noontime on Saturday. You hear the whistle blow, nice sunny day, you hear the whistle go off and say, okay, yeah, that's a weekly test. If it's a tornado watch or siren or anything else, if it's going to be like this weekend with Hurricane Lee, and you know, all of a sudden the sky is black, you hear thunder, and the siren goes off, it's like, oh, that's not a siren test. So it's the context of the situation. But when you're looking at in your business with context, saying, here's another thing, you want to show urgency for your audience to take action. I love this sign in Southern Nevada because it says, okay, well, hey, I better stop at the rest area here because there's, or I better make sure my car has enough gas. But it's showing urgency because, and Bob, in sales, people are not going to act unless they see there's a good reason to act. So if I'm talking about artificial intelligence and I said, hey, unless you do something now, ChatGPT is going to replace half of your employees. And I said, well, okay, yeah, it's like I've got to act within the next year or next 6 months. You put a time limit on, you put a context, you put some urgency there and say, okay, well, now I've got your attention. That's a trigger. Contrast and context, I think they're siblings, definitely. But it's old way, new way. Why should the audience change from the status quo? And that's something that I think a lot of people don't really think about. They're thinking about, hey, this is what I do. I can increase whatever, well, worker retention, leadership training, all the different things that you're doing. I can do this 20% better. And people say, well, hey, I'm happy with the status quo. It's like, well, it's something you want to give the audience a reason to change from that status quo, and something that you want to let people know that, hey, that status quo is not going to, you're not going to be happy with that forever. So if you can create a little discomfort with that status quo of saying that, hey, if you don't do anything, the context and the contrast together, that your business is really going to take a dip. It might be okay, you're comfortable with it now, but you really need to make a change within this amount of time. So it's that context and the contrast are an important way of showing that here is something that the audience is going to remember, and more tying to that call to action. They're not going to act on something unless they have a context and contrast and a reason to care and a reason to act. Another way to do that, again, with stories, contrast before and after stories, with and without stories. So it could be maybe in project management, well, they were using waterfall, but now they went to agile, and this is what it was before, this is how it is after. Something that you can talk about, but it's showing that contrast, the reason to move on from the status quo. All right, one more thing before I finish here with the slides, and that's with performance, how to become a presentation rock star. And I don't think, Bob, is that you? I don't think that was a picture of you a couple years ago. So it looks a bit nice. That's a Stratocaster. It's not one of your guitars. So, but one thing about that is you can do all the preparation. You can go through, the 3 ins, the 3 cons, the understand, care, remember. But when you are up in front of that room or in front of that webcam, one thing you want to do is don't use PowerPoint as a teleprompter. You are giving a talk to that chamber, to that group. You have a call to action. You have that big idea, you have the call to action, and you want some kind of change, whether the change is to make a change in what you do, or even just to refer you to someone who could use your services. If you're just doing, bullet point after bullet point, and PowerPoint is your teleprompter, you are going to get a change, but that change is going to be from wakefulness to sleep. Just don't want to be boring. No matter what your topic is or how exciting your topic is, if you're just doing teleprompter from PowerPoint, people are going to get bored. So it's knowing how to give that presentation, again, connecting with that audience and not using that. So I put up this picture of Bruce Springsteen saying that, hey, the presentation rock star knows their slides are not their presentation. Interesting. A few years ago, a colleague of mine, I'd given a presentation at a computer conference, and a colleague came up and said, hey, Rick, I teach over at Curry College. Could you come talk to my computer programming class? They're a bunch of college freshmen, and they really need to know about presenting. I said, yeah, why not? And I put up this slide to a group of 18-year-olds, and I got a bunch of blank stares. I'm like, what? And my friend Ron said, Rick, they don't know who that is. And I said, oh my God, I feel old. Well, I am old, but I really mean feel old. And now if I'm presenting to a younger group, there's a picture of Taylor Swift, because they all know who Taylor Swift is. But for this group, I said, yeah, I think everyone in this group knows Springsteen, but also because the next slide I have is Bruce with his band, and an important message here. You are the presentation. Your slides are your backup band. They are there to support you. So if you are working on Zoom and for some reason you can't share your screen, or if you're live in a room and the projector breaks, you're the expert about your topic. You have that insight, that expert opinion. The slides are helping you bring your point across, but the slides are not your presentation. So I wanted to wrap up here. I've got a QR code and also a link. It's presentationmedic.com .worksheets /worksheets, and that it's a PDF, a fillable PDF. So it has the understand, care, remember on the first page, and then the interesting, insightful, interactive, and then the connection, context, contrast. So it gives you a chance as you're planning a presentation, and this could be to Lewiston Auburn Chamber, it could be to a group in Portland, it could be a large group with 100 people, it could be 2 or 3 people, or just one-on-one. But a way to fill this out, and it's save it, download it, and you can see those shaded areas there. You'll be able to type in, or if you want to print it out and handwrite it, that's fine too. But it's a good way to look at that, and it's explaining information so people will understand, care, and remember. And it's a way for you to take your topic, whatever it is, and turn it, even if it's a boring topic, turn it into an engaging presentation that's going to capture and keep the attention of the audience, get them to understand your big idea, and get them to act. So I will give a plug here for the ACE Speaks, the Present Perfect website, workshops, or Present Perfect, like there's a little pun there. Carrie, I would guess that's intentional, of more present perfect or past tense, or I figure with Carrie, I figure with you there'd be a pun in there. So at least it didn't say past tense or dangling participle or anything else there. But
that's the next series.
Oh, okay, good. So let me stop sharing for a minute. I see there's a couple things in chat, and 2 new messages in chat, and from and Matthew, thanks for putting that link in. Karen asked, how do you handle the one person? Okay, then we have that before, right? The obnoxious type. Okay, and Carrie said thanks. Okay, so we have both of those. All right, so we have a few minutes left. Anything for upcoming presentations? I know we have a few people here who are going to be presenting to Katie's group, but any questions or ideas or anything that you wanted to talk for a couple minutes about what you're going to talk about and get some feedback from the group of any ideas?
I actually had a question for Katie, but really could be answered by anyone. Katie, you probably watch more presentations in a year than anybody here.
I do.
Yeah. Daily, weekly, sometimes twice. Are there things you've seen over and over and over again that really bomb?
No, and the reason why is we're really thoughtful when partnering with anyone to with their topics. So we make sure that we have a variety of topics, and I don't plan out my topics a year in advance. I pay attention to what my hospitality people are, what their needs are, what my small business needs are, what is happening in the world, in the community, and at large, to bring them content that is valuable, right? That they can actually use and people are going to want to hear about. So no, because we don't tend to jump ahead and just say, we're going to do this, webinar or seminar just to do it. That is not the objective. One, I don't want to waste my presenters' time, and I also don't want to waste other people's time as well. And Rick, I think you did an amazing job explaining a lot. I know I smiled a lot during it because you're right. You are very right. I do watch a lot of these, and it is important to keep people engaged. It is so important to keep people, because what happens is people are going to remember this and be like, okay, so next time I'm just not going to go to a webinar again with that particular person because I didn't retain anything. It was not engaging. It didn't hit, what I was looking for. But Carrie, to answer your question, no, we don't see that because I'm very thoughtful. I'm very thoughtful.
Good. How do you feel about shameless plugs of books?
Say that again. I'm sorry.
If somebody has a book, how do you feel about a shameless plug of a book at the beginning or end of a program?
Like if they have a book, like they published
Yeah,
it,
yeah.
I'm fine with that. If it is pertaining to what this person does, I think it's okay. And especially if it pertains to the topic, right? So the topic of the thread of topics, I am fine with somebody saying, if you want more in depth, if you want to carry this conversation, because most of my webinars are only an hour, you can only give so much information in an hour. And then if somebody wants to know more, learn more, I always connect them with that presenter, right? So if you want to know more, please, by all means, contact this person. So yes, I think it's totally fine to do it. Once again, I will repeat kind of what Rick said. Let's not draw it out, right? It is fine that you share a link. It's so fine that you say that you have this information. Please contact me and I'll give you more. That's totally fine.
So taste matters.
I mean, the way that you present yourself and information matters, right? People's attention span is very short. So you want to be straight to the point and direct. You don't want it to be confusing and you don't want to lose people. Their attention span lasts about 30 seconds. So
yeah, and Katie, I think you've got a difficult job too, because I think if people say, "Oh, I want to talk to the Lewiston Auburn Chamber," and you say, "Well, the rules are, this is not going to be a 1-hour sales pitch,"
right?
And I'm sure people hear that, and a lot of people, I think, will overreact to that, and they will just go into a generic data dump and say, well, here's all the things there. And instead of telling stories, which aren't sales pitches, because if you tell the story where the customer is the hero, where the people in your story are the heroes, and you were a guide or a trusted advisor, that's not a sales presentation. But I think, and you've probably seen so many of these where people just overreact and just give generic information and put people to sleep.
So, I mean, I really, I do a lot of coaching ahead of time. So we coach on slides, right? So your slides matter as well, because that's what people are seeing while you're talking. So we do a lot of coaching, and I also give spaces for people to be able to do those pitches, not during webinars, but in other settings, right? Get in front of people, come to my networking events. This is the way that you're going to pitch and sell yourself, right? But what you're providing me and others is content, information that's helpful and useful. So a lot of coaching.
Right. Great. Yeah. And Katie, I think you're unique in the group of, chambers, because a lot of people won't take the time that you're taking to coach the speakers.
Yeah.
It's just like more of a Rotary breakfast or Kiwanis breakfast, whatever. And they say, oh, great, we get a speaker. And they say, okay, well, did they show up on time? Good. Okay. They called the day before. Make sure you show up for breakfast. And that's all they do.
Yeah.
But kudos to you for coaching the speakers and making sure it's going to be a presentation that people are going to find useful, and getting some useful information instead of just generic things that they already knew.
Well, I think it also benefits the presenter, right? They need to hear this information, and it's not like the attendees are going to be like, hey, I have some feedback for you, right? They're not going to do that during the presentation or even after. So, I mean, if you can be open and honest, and the presenter be willing to hear that feedback, they will all get more out of it. Everybody will get more out of it. Right. So
any questions about giving a short presentation? I know we have a few people here who are part of BNI, and that's more of I think like a 10-minute presentation about that. But I have, on presentations you've given, have you been able to work stories in, or get something that is unique about you, or something that is not boring but engaging, instead of having people nod off?
It's a weekly struggle. We do 60-second presentations every week, and then a couple times a year we do a 10-minute presentation. So this has been a really great talk for me to hear, and I put it in the chat, but I loved the idea of you are not the hero. I know my first presentation was I went to school for da 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 da, and so that's such a great reminder to make it about the audience. So thank you.
Oh, great. Yeah, and Alice, I know someone who is a photographer, and they said, they asked me, well, what do you do? And like, it was more of like, oh, I take pictures of weddings, I take pictures of, parties or events, whatever. And finally, the photographer, he changed his elevator pitch into, and they said, what do you do? He says, I make people smile. And I think, and I know you do videography, but it's more of, instead of, well, I use this type of camera and this equipment, and I'm doing 4K or I'm doing that. It's just more of, I help people capture the important moments in their life. And it's more,
And I
again,
help people feel comfortable on camera.
yeah, exactly. And then
Yeah.
it's not about you. It's about that, because, you say that to me, all the virtual things I do, if that camera goes on, if the light goes on in the camera, I'm like, oh, I'm a different person. And I remember I took a course, well, this is maybe around 5-6 years ago now. I took a course called Master of Video Presence. And this was a guy down in Connecticut, Steve Washer is his name. He's a great teacher. And I took the course with Steve, and I told him, I said, Steve, I can be in front of a room of 40 people in person, give a presentation, and I'm animated, I'm making eye contact with everyone, and I feel like I'm very comfortable on the stage. But I said, if I'm in my spare bedroom and the red light comes on the camera and it's just me talking to the camera, I freeze up. I'm just really dull. And then he says, Rick, I've got the answer for you. Invite 40 people into your spare bedroom. And it's like, well, no, but I've become more comfortable on camera over the years, but I still feel that I am much more interactive and, are a much better presenter in person instead of staring at the webcam. And Alice, I admire what you do, because I know it's difficult for people. They're used to one-on-one and reaction. This goes back to Carrie's question about people and interaction and making things interactive. But yeah, if you are just staring at a camera, making a YouTube video or a TikTok or whatever else, it's like, you don't have that live feedback, and it becomes very difficult.
It's hard to work in a vacuum.
It is.
Rick, I appreciate the point that you made about PowerPoint not being a teleprompter. It's really hard to sit through those types of presentations. And the fact that PowerPoint is not the presentation, you are the presentation. And Springsteen is still relevant. And those of us will cling to the boss for as long as we can. And a technique that I've used is sometimes I do build my presentation in PowerPoint, and I use those bullet points, but then instead of making that the final presentation, that becomes my draft. And I take all that material and I take it and I pull it out of the slide and I put that into the presenter notes. And that becomes, those are my talking points. And then I go back and I build the actual slide that the audience is going to see. But those notes become the part that's visible to me, the presenter. Right. And because those bullets are what I want to cover in my spoken portion of the presentation. And so I really like what you mentioned about PowerPoint should not be a teleprompter. And I appreciate your phrasing it that way. I'd not heard it captured quite that way before. And thank you for hitting that point. That's so valuable.
Great. Well, I'm glad that helped you. And, I think a lot of things also, and, I spent a lot of time in sales giving presentations, and this was in the, public safety market, right? I spent 35 years working for Motorola as a sales engineer. And I was giving presentations to mayors, to police chiefs, to people who their schedule would change. I remember this was in the city of Boston, and we had the police commissioner in the room, and we had an hour with the police commissioner. And 5 minutes into my presentation, someone tapped him on the shoulder. And he said, "Okay, what is it?" And a minute later, he says, "The mayor just called. I'm going to meet with the mayor in a half hour, but I've got another 5 minutes I can stay." It's like, well, that's not going to happen, probably not in a chamber presentation, but I think if you're meeting with a client and you had an hour and the client says, "Hey, something just came up. Can you go over something in 5 minutes?" And it's like, okay, you have to be prepared for that. You've got to be prepared with that. And you've got a 1 hour version of your presentation, but it could be that you want to get that big idea, that call to action, over when, they call it, whether it's called an elevator pitch or someone says, "Hey, I've got to leave, but hey, walk with me to my car and tell me what your 1 hour presentation is. Tell me without slides. Tell me, just give me a summary of what you have." And that's why it's good to start with, well, what's my big idea? What's my call to action? What lessons can I take from, whether it's a TED Talk or an elevator pitch? If I've got an hour to talk about it, fine. But if I've got to do the same thing there, and I think also from a chamber meeting, someone who was sitting in the chamber meeting and says, "Okay, I want to, Allison just spoke for an hour, and she's really good." And they said, "Well, you should talk to her." And, "Well, what does Allison do?" Well, they're not going to show 4 or 5 slides about what you did. You want them in 30 seconds to say, "Allison helps people do this. She helps this group of people, go from point A to point B, or from do that." So that's your message. That's the big idea. And that's when I mentioned before about a tweet or that, but it's more of someone who left the presentation and said, "Oh, you should talk to Alice because she helps people become more comfortable on camera," or you should talk about. So it's more of a very quick thing to summarize that. And that's the referral thing, whether it's through BNI or whether it's through a chamber meeting. It's a ways that people know something very simple about you, but it's a way they can refer you. And they're not going to show your PowerPoint slides to tell their friend to call you. So, Terry, we've got just around 5 minutes to wrap up. So,
Yeah. Do we have any additional questions or comments for Rick?
all right. And yeah, I'm in the ACE member directory. You saw on the website, but reach out to me on LinkedIn, on through ACE or whatever else, and happy to talk to you, or any ideas you want to run by me. And yeah, sign up for that Present Perfect.
Well, thank you, Rick. Thank you very much. That was great. I think we're all going to be using your sheet and figuring out a whole bunch of ins and cons. So wanted to remind everybody of our next set of programs. October, again, is Crafting Comprehensive Consulting Agreements 2.0 with Carrie and MTI. And then in November, Malika Malhotra will be with us to grow your business faster with a niche brand. Also, I'd like to point out that we did record this today, and we will be trying to make as quick a turn on that as we can. It takes a little while to get things down and get things edited, but we hope to have it sometime either over the weekend or first thing Monday. So that should be up on the YouTube channel as soon as we can get it there.
Yeah, let me just jump in there. If you do want to attend a Present Perfect workshop, well, for those of you who have watched this program, you've gotten a really good setup for them. But if you want a refresher, you can always look at the video. And if you know somebody who wants to go to one of the workshops but miss the program, encourage them to watch the video of this, because I think the workshop format is going to be a fast, deep dive into actually getting some hands-on experience.
All right. Well, so thank you everybody for attending, and hope to see you all soon.
Okay, thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Okay.